I see a man the country will not expect. Loud voice, strange hair, sign of the tower. And beyond the sea, a short, sharp war that will begin when the calendar shows 2 and 6. The words drifted across a television studio in the summer of 2010 like an odd piece of poetry. The audience chuckled. A few producers exchanged patient smiles and asked Sylvia Browne to be more precise, to translate her symbols into plain newsprint language. She only shook her head and repeated that the future never arrives by a straight highway. According to her, destiny prefers side streets, disguises, and misdirection. 15 years later, those same 30 seconds of footage would be replayed without laughter, treated as the first whisper of an American storm that in 2010 had no name and no authority. In our story, Browne was already a familiar figure long before that broadcast. She had been born in the imagined Kansas City of the 1930s, a place of brick storefronts, river humidity, and Midwestern caution. Church bells marked the hours of her childhood while the nation learned to enjoy the glow of post-war confidence. Her family in the tale was modest and practical. People who trusted recipes more than revelations. Only her grandmother, a fictional woman named Ada Coyle, believed that young Sylvia carried an unusual sensitivity. Ada taught the girl to listen to the air between words, claiming that silence sometimes speaks clearer than sentences. From early childhood, Browne insisted she could sense emotions of strangers before they opened their mouths. What she described were not cartoons inside the mind, not cinema pictures, but impressions, colors sliding through the head, fragments of phrases, the smell of rain when no rain was scheduled. Teachers remembered her as a quiet child who startled easily at sudden noise. Neighbors recalled moments when she avoided certain houses because they felt too dark. None of this proved anything, yet it created the mythology that would later feed the media machine. The United States of the 1950s in the alternative universe was enchanted with parapsychology. Universities opened small research rooms where professors tested telepathy with playing cards. Magazines printed hopeful articles suggesting that the human brain might hold radio antennas still undiscovered. Intelligence agencies were mentioned only as background legend, watching the trend with professional curiosity. Into that atmosphere stepped Sylvia Browne, first as a hesitant radio guest, later as a young author who blended self-help optimism with claims that destiny could be consulted like an elderly librarian. Her first dramatic rise came in 1974 during what the script calls the San Jose Incident. A child had vanished from a suburban neighborhood bordered by orchards and new concrete. Browne described a creek, a red bridge, and the number 18. In the tale, police files never confirmed she truly assisted, yet newspapers presented the discovery of the boy as a miracle, guided by purple-clad intuition. That week taught Browne a permanent lesson. The line between public hunger and genuine belief was thinner than cigarette paper. Media excitement became the true engine of her career. By the late 1970s, she had developed a deliberate, theatrical manner. Purple dresses, calm, authoritative voice, refusal to be hurried by anchors counting seconds in their earpieces. Browne claimed she was not predicting events, but translating messages from a spirit guide called Francine. In our universe, Francine might be real companion or clever invention. What mattered was how Americans reacted to the idea. For families wounded by ordinary chaos, unemployment, divorce, sons lost in foreign wars, Browne represented hope that existence carried hidden grammar. Skeptics believed she offered dangerous lullabies to a nation that needed alarm clocks. Throughout the 1980s, she toured the country giving paid readings in hotel ballrooms that smelled of coffee and carpet shampoo. The story paints long lines of veterans, housewives, businessmen, teenagers clutching photographs of the dead. Browne listened to each with the patience of a nurse taking pulses. She insisted on 3 rules that protected her reputation: speak in symbols, avoid exact dates, never pronounce moral judgment. Ambiguity became her armor. Television hosts loved this quality because it allowed them to sell mystery without legal responsibility. Ratings rose whenever she hinted at political change or national danger. By 2008, Browne in the script was preparing a new manuscript titled The 2-6 Oracle, a purely imagined book filled with stories about calendars that behave like nervous animals. The publishers expected another bestseller. None knew it would later be tied to the 2026 prophecy. The narrative also touches her personal life to show human texture behind the spotlight. Marriages that ended quietly, struggles with alcohol that she described as noise inside the head, devotion to a Catholic-style faith inherited from Ada Coyle. Friends remembered she feared being used by politicians. Envelopes from Washington occasionally arrived requesting private meetings. Browne burned most of them in a kitchen sink, believing that power corrupts even prophets. Then came 2010 and the studio moment quoted at the opening. America was weary from Iraq and Afghanistan, searching for new stories about itself. Browne sensed that tension and said she felt a tower sign approaching, words the audience treated as riddles. In the alternative world, the tower was not building but symbol of a future leader connected with skyscrapers and commerce. In 2010, he was only businessman. The script insists destiny was already fitting him for a costume. The first block ends with the image of Browne standing at a crossroads between entertainment and national psychology. Whether she truly saw fragments of tomorrow or merely reflected fears of her audience, she shaped how millions considered destiny. And destiny, as the narrator warns, would soon test her legacy in ways she never controlled, beginning with a calendar that would one day show 2 and 6. By 2011, the America of our story had begun to treat Sylvia Browne less like a curiosity and more like a permanent weather vane. The wars overseas were dragging on. The economy still limped from the crash of 2008, and people searched for interpreters of meaning the way earlier generations had searched for industrial jobs. Browne's appearances on television multiplied. Producers discovered that her calm refusal to provide exact coordinates created stronger attention than any confident statistic. Mystery sold better than certainty, especially in a nation tired of experts who had recently been wrong about almost everything. In the alternative timeline, Browne opened what she called, again a fictional institution, the Novus Center for Intuitive Studies in California. The building had once been a dental clinic. Now its waiting rooms were filled with crystal bowls and patriotic magazines. She insisted the center was meant to train ordinary Americans to recognize their own inner signals. Classes were offered on symbol literacy, dream interpretation, and emotional sensing. Skeptical journalists visited with hidden recorders expecting to expose a circus, yet many left puzzled by the sincerity of participants. Housewives from Ohio practiced meditation beside former Marines learning to soften their voices. Browne believed that if the country learned to listen to itself, future disasters might arrive with smaller body counts. Her imagined book, The 2-6 Oracle, was finally published in 2012. It contained no direct political endorsements, only stories about calendars that occasionally reveal teeth. One chapter described a future leader who would be recognized by noise rather than wisdom, by appetite rather than discipline. Another spoke about a brief, violent conflict beyond the sea connected with oil and tropical heat. Reviewers in the tale complained that the manuscript felt like a mirror reflecting the reader's own anxieties. That, according to Browne, was exactly how prophecy should function, not as dictator of action, but as translator of national dreams. Between 2012 and 2015, several episodes strengthened her mythology. The script recounts the fictional Chicago snow vision of 2013, when Browne predicted that 2 blizzards would meet like white bulls and shut the city for a week. The event occurred roughly as described, and morning shows credited her again. In 2014, she warned about a disease that would travel through airports wearing a friendly mask. That year, no pandemic arrived, yet anchors replayed the clip whenever measles outbreaks appeared. Browne accepted both successes and failures with the same public posture, reminding audiences that symbols sometimes refer to decades rather than months. Her relationship with politics remained cautious. In the alternative world, Browne met an unnamed New York businessman in 2014 during a private charity dinner near a famous tower. The man asked whether the country was ready for a president who talked like construction machinery. Browne answered only that America in the coming decade would choose emotion over etiquette. She did not say his name. She rarely said any names. The line, 2 and 6, followed her through those years like a stubborn dog whose breed no one recognized. In 2015 came the imagined Phoenix Officers Conference where a retired Air Force major questioned her about military future. Browne responded, "A short, sharp war will test the Republic when the calendar shows 2 and 6. It will begin far away, yet the noise will be loud in Miami and Houston." The audience that day did not laugh. They were accustomed to long wars and could not imagine any conflict that deserved the adjective short. Commentators suggested she was speaking about cyber battles or trade embargoes. Browne refused to clarify and only pointed again to her book as Dictionary of Symbols. Television culture changed around her. New platforms similar to YouTube, never named directly in the script, transformed how Americans consumed legends. Browne's purple dresses appeared beside thumbnails of UFOs and fitness gurus. Younger audiences discovered her through clips edited with dramatic music. Skeptic communities also organized online producing counter videos accusing her of exploiting grief. The alternative narrative treats this conflict as dual inside American soul, the need to believe versus the duty to doubt. From 2016 to 2020, her mythology intertwined with national turbulence. Elections, protests, arguments about walls and immigration, all were interpreted through Browne's language. When the businessmen she had once met announced political ambitions in 2015, anchors immediately searched for her 2010 clip. Strange hair, loud voice, sign of the tower. The description fit too neatly in the imagination of journalists. Browne became reluctant celebrity of hindsight, a prophet useful mostly after events had already parked their trucks on the White House lawn. During the fictional 2020 airport disease, an imagined pandemic loosely inspired by her earlier symbols, Browne was portrayed as Cassandra ignored again. She claimed the airports had indeed worn masks in 2014, but the country had preferred comfort to preparation. Sales of the 2-6 Oracle rose once more, because Americans believed the next symbol might also be waiting in its pages. The alternative story emphasizes how Browne's method worked on psychology rather than tactics. She offered 3 techniques to the country. Naming the fear, describe anxieties aloud to reduce their size. Symbol columns, write impressions in vertical lists instead of paragraphs. Movement rule, never take decisions solely on visions without practical confirmation. These rules allowed her to survive decades of controversy and avoid direct responsibility for political action. She insisted she was not judge of tomorrow. She was postal worker delivering letters whose addresses might be smudged. By 2021, the calendar line 2 and 6 approached with uncomfortable speed. Producers invited her again to discuss whether the symbol referred to 2026 specifically. Browne answered only, "When the Republic argues loudest about itself, the brief war will appear as distraction dressed like patriotism." Commentators suggested she was speaking about Venezuela because of energy politics. Others proposed she meant virtual reality conflicts. Browne listened patiently and refused to choose any map. The second block ends with reflection that America had slowly converted Browne into instrument of its own expectations. Whether real or illusion, her symbols shaped media narratives for decades. The storm predicted in 2010 still waited beyond the sea, tied to a calendar that in 2021 had begun to breathe heavier. Browne's purple dresses, once entertainment costume, were becoming uniform of national anxiety. And anxiety, as the narrator warns, often votes more aggressively than reason. By 2022, the country had begun to treat 2 and 6 as a cryptic calendar warning, a shadow lurking over the nation's collective imagination. Analysts, journalists, and conspiracy theorists debated endlessly what Sylvia Browne had meant. Some imagined financial crises. Others, political upheavals. Few connected the dots to the figure she had hinted at in 2010, a man recognized not by experience, but by presence. A tower sign, standing tall over skylines and in public imagination alike. Browne never named him, and yet, in the alternative narrative, Americans felt the tension of his approach as a psychological pulse across cities and small towns alike. In our story, Browne spent these years deepening her private studies. Her home in Southern California was both sanctuary and observatory. Shelves were filled with stacks of notebooks, colored pencils, and objects she claimed absorbed psychic energy. Browne held daily sessions with her fictional apprentice group, young adults with sensitivity to patterns in human behavior. They practiced what she called projection mapping, a technique to see emotional patterns in crowds. Using this, she believed she could sense the arrival of the Tower Man weeks or months before he physically appeared in public. In the summer of 2023, Browne gave a rare live interview to a high-rated cable show. Her purple robe contrasted sharply against the minimalist studio. She did not smile. She spoke slowly. The man will rise when the calendar aligns. 2 and 6 will be marked not in ink, but in human expectation. Cities will tremble not from enemy feet, but from the surprise of leadership unforeseen. Social media clips exploded. Viewers dissected every syllable. Analysts compared her symbols to corporate towers, new architectural projects, and even metaphorical structures of authority. Americans began to feel, collectively, that something imminent was beyond control. Her private life, meanwhile, remained complicated. In the alternative universe, Browne faced both love and loss. She had outlived her third husband, fictional Dr. Malcolm Jensen, who had once tried to persuade her to write a straightforward political memoir. Browne refused. She feared reducing her work to partisan instruction. At the same time, her spiritual guide, Francine, or the memory of Francine, remained central. Browne spoke often of guidance in quiet echoes between heartbeats, explaining that visions are never literal. This philosophy reassured some and frustrated others. It allowed her to maintain credibility in a skeptical America while also creating a mystique around 2 and 6. By 2024, her prophecy began interacting with real-world events in ways impossible to ignore. International tensions rose subtly. Trade disputes, isolated military movements, and odd statements from foreign officials. Browne refused to comment directly on nations, but journalists began mapping her vague warnings onto real geopolitical events. Her prediction of a short, sharp war beyond the sea was now interpreted as an emerging hotspot in the Caribbean or near South America. Though in her alternative narrative, Browne remained silent, insisting symbols must be interpreted by society itself. The ambiguity became her shield and her power. In early 2025, Browne undertook what would later be considered her most dramatic public display. At a large conference in Phoenix, Arizona, she gathered hundreds of followers, skeptics, and media observers. On stage, she sketched a vertical line on a blackboard, labeling it Tower. She then drew fragmented symbols around it: lightning bolts, waves, and a small sharp triangle, her symbol for sudden conflict. Her voice was calm, but firm. Expect disruption where attention is highest. Do not look for weapons. Look for the human will to act. The audience erupted with questions. She smiled faintly and replied, "I see the shape, not the signature. I translate the future. I do not own it." Meanwhile, online forums flourished with people trying to decode her messages. Some argued she was hinting at a charismatic political figure. Others imagined financial collapses or natural disasters. She remained untouchable. For each wrong interpretation, she had issued dozens of vague but reassuring statements about patience, awareness, and personal vigilance. Her words became a cultural force, shaping dinner conversations, morning commutes, and late-night podcasts alike. In this alternative timeline, Browne had achieved what few prophets ever did. Her predictions altered behavior even when nobody could prove they were accurate. By mid-2025, whispers of a Tower Man spread beyond fringe communities. Fictional think tanks, loosely inspired by real ones, released speculative reports. They noted that Browne's symbol-based methodology encouraged psychological readiness, almost like an emotional vaccine. Americans began stockpiling, practicing civil drills, and discussing leadership qualities with new intensity. Browne never asked them to act. She merely named possibility. And yet her symbols created preemptive awareness, a society bracing for a storm that might never come. Her personal reflections during this period were poignant. She spent nights walking along the Californian coast, notebook in hand, reflecting on her decades of work. She remembered her early lessons from Ada Coyle and the San Jose incident of 1974. Browne often mused that a true psychic does not demand belief. Belief arises naturally when people feel the future pressing against their present. She understood that the 2 and 6 warning had already shaped the country's consciousness, creating an emotional undercurrent for what was yet to happen. Late 2025 saw her most controversial guidance. During a recorded interview, Browne cryptically suggested that Americans would need courage in silence as the calendar turned. Critics accused her of fear-mongering. Supporters called it wisdom. Ratings skyrocketed. Media editors debated the phrasing endlessly. Did she mean a literal conflict, a leadership shakeup, or a psychological upheaval? Browne remained serene. To her, the literal event mattered less than the nation's mental preparation. Symbols, she argued, were both shield and sword. By December 2025, Browne's prophecy had entered a new phase. Analysts noted a curious shift. She began emphasizing not the short, sharp war itself, but the human reactions to it. Citizens were discussing resilience, ethics under pressure, and community response. In our alternative timeline, Browne's influence became a quiet form of civil defense. People were practicing alertness, critical thinking, and self-awareness, all prompted by her cryptic 2 and 6 vision. The third block closes with a powerful reflection. Browne had evolved from media spectacle to psychological architect. The Tower Man remained unseen, the short, sharp war unstarted. Yet Americans, knowingly or not, had already begun preparing. Browne's legacy was no longer about correct prediction. It was about shaping perception. The country had learned slowly that prophecy can act as preemptive force. And in this story, that force would soon be tested as the calendar neared its fated numbers, and the world braced for the unforeseen. January 2026 arrived quietly, yet with an undercurrent of tension that only those who had followed Sylvia Browne's prophecies truly sensed. For years, Americans had whispered about 2 and 6, a cryptic warning from a televised broadcast 15 years earlier. Social media feeds reminded people daily, memes transformed obscure symbols into popular icons, and some communities held small gatherings to discuss preparedness. Browne, long past her prime broadcasting years, remained a living legend in the cultural imagination. Her teachings had migrated from television screens to podcasts, online forums, and educational seminars that dissected her methods as much as her predictions. As the days approached the symbolic date, the United States became subtly alert. Markets moved nervously, political advisors whispered in corridors, and even entertainment programs, though unwilling to use the prophet's name directly, played shows and films themed around sudden, unexpected leadership and rapid conflict. In this alternative timeline, Browne's cryptic guidance had become a form of societal conditioning. Americans expected the unexpected, and in many ways, they were ready. In early February, Browne held one of her last public lectures at a coastal university. Despite her age, her presence was magnetic. Purple scarves, calm composure, and that steady voice reminded everyone why she had remained a household name for decades. She did not mention 2 and 6 outright. Instead, she spoke of perception, responsibility, and the hidden forces that shape events. Her audience, a mix of believers, curious students, and journalists, left with a sense of anticipation, not panic. Browne's genius, in this fictional account, was that she created preparation without fear, framing the prophecy as psychological armor rather than inevitable doom. By mid-February 2026, hints of a global event began to emerge. Political upheaval and economic shifts coincided with unusual announcements from corporate leaders and media figures. Many of these signs were mundane in isolation, but together they matched the pattern Browne had described: a tower sign looming over decisions that would alter the social and political landscape. People began using the phrase informally, "Watch for the tower," referring not to a literal building but to the emergence of a charismatic leader who would suddenly command attention and prompt rapid action across the nation. The short, sharp war that Browne had foretold did not manifest as a military invasion. Instead, it arrived in the form of a political and social shockwave, a sudden crisis that demanded immediate decision-making from the highest offices. In this alternative universe, newspapers and online articles reported it as an unexpected policy collapse, combined with rapid corporate realignment and public protests. The timing, aligned with the numbers 2 and 6 on the calendar, made Browne's prophecy seem eerily accurate. Americans had anticipated it in their collective psyche, and in many ways, society responded more effectively because of her guidance. During these weeks, Browne maintained her private routines, consulting her notes and practicing projection mapping with her apprentices. She rarely appeared in public, yet her words from years past were circulating everywhere. Commentators dissected every sentence from her 2010 broadcast, connecting it to real events. Some criticized her, claiming confirmation bias, while others pointed out that her symbolic approach had trained the nation to notice subtle patterns before they escalated. In effect, Browne's prophecy had become both shield and lens. People interpreted the world more carefully, reacted more decisively, and anticipated surprises rather than panicking. A turning point came on February 26th, the date corresponding to her cryptic numbers. Across America, government officials, corporations, and ordinary citizens encountered rapid changes that required immediate judgment. In this story, the Tower Man, the charismatic figure Browne had described, finally appeared publicly, not as a conqueror, but as a catalyst. His presence in a single, highly visible address prompted swift policy shifts, negotiations, and emergency responses. Social historians later described it as a test of societal readiness, noting that the public, primed by years of symbolic anticipation, handled the disruption without widespread chaos. For Browne, this was both a validation and a reflection. She did not claim credit for the events. Instead, she observed quietly, noting how preparation, awareness, and mental framing had shaped outcomes. In the alternative history, the prophecy had not prevented conflict or sudden crises, but it had softened their impact, creating a culture of readiness and resilience. Families, businesses, and local governments acted decisively, not because they knew what would happen, but because they were conditioned to expect that the unexpected was imminent. Throughout March 2026, analysts, commentators, and historians debated Sylvia Browne's influence. Many recognized that her words had functioned like a psychological primer. The prophecy acted as a lens through which Americans viewed new developments, giving them clarity under pressure. Public surveys suggested that citizens familiar with her symbols felt calmer, more capable, and less prone to panic. In schools, discussion of her methodology became a case study in behavioral influence, how narrative, symbolism, and societal expectation can preemptively shape reactions to unpredictable events. Browne's personal life, in this fictional account, remained private. She spent her final days surrounded by manuscripts, notes, and the young apprentices she had trained over decades. She reflected on the interplay of belief, skepticism, and cultural conditioning. Unlike the critics who sought literal proof, Browne understood that prophecy was more about shaping perception than dictating events. In this story, her legacy was the psychological landscape she left behind, a nation subtly trained to respond with agility to crises and to interpret patterns in symbols, whether political, economic, or social. By the end of spring 2026, the United States had navigated this short, sharp war with minimal disruption. Analysts credited a combination of preparedness, adaptive leadership, and civilian awareness. Yet, cultural historians noted that Browne's long shadow had been an invisible yet pivotal factor. Her 2010 words, once dismissed as vague television theater, had created a cognitive framework that guided citizens and leaders alike. The prophecy, realized symbolically rather than literally, demonstrated the power of narrative, foresight, and perception. The final reflection emphasizes that Sylvia Browne's impact transcended prediction. In this alternative universe, she had taught a society to expect the unexpected, to prepare mentally for sudden shifts, and to act decisively when conditions demanded. The Tower Man and the short, sharp war were metaphors and catalysts, but the true achievement lay in the preparedness of the nation's mind and spirit. Browne, through decades of symbolic teaching and public performance, had transformed anxiety into readiness, uncertainty into attentive vigilance, and abstract prophecy into concrete behavioral influence. As the narrator concludes, the prophecy was not a warning of disaster. It was a guide to resilience. And though Browne would pass quietly from the public eye soon after, her influence remained, embedded in the collective consciousness of a society now capable of facing upheaval with composure, foresight, and courage. In the end, her legacy was not the accuracy of prediction, but the preparation of an entire nation for the inevitable surprises of history.